We seek God whenever we explore truth, goodness, and beauty to their uttermost reaches. We must take care, however, not to treat these objects of our striving as independent of one another, for then we are likely to pursue some partial truth, some mistaken goodness, or some illusory beauty. The pursuit of truth unwedded to an appreciation of goodness and beauty is likely to issue in the sort of personality that can be absorbed in the scientific investigation of the explosive properties of certain chemicals, wholly indifferent as to whether one's conclusions can be made to further war or peace, construction or destruction. The selection that I just read from was from the 1937 work, The Meaning of God in the Modern Jewish Religion, by Mordechai Kaplan. The point of this work was to try and find a comprehensive, modern religious framework for Orthodox Jews before World War II, and I want to contrast this with Christopher Lasch's 1991 work, The True and Only Heaven, Progress and Its Critics, more specifically, his description of the contemporary liberal of his time and their ideology as it manifested around him. Notably, you're going to find in this long quote that I read until the end of the video a distinct lack of metaphysics, something more along the compartmentalized area that Kaplan decried in his work. The attraction of progressive ideology, at least in its liberal version, thus turns out to be its greatest weakness, its rejection of a heroic conception of life. The concept of progress can be defended against intelligent criticism only by postulating an indefinite expansion of desires, a steady rise in the general standard of comfort, and the incorporation of the masses into the culture of abundance. It is only in this form that the idea of progress has survived the rigors of the 20th century. More extravagant versions of the progressive faith, premised on the perfectibility of human nature, on the unrealized power of reason or love, collapsed a long time ago, but the liberal version has proved surprisingly resistant to the shocks to easy optimism administered in rapid succession by 20th century events. Liberalism was never utopian, unless the democratization of consumption is itself a utopian ideal. It made no difficult demands on human nature. It presupposed nothing more strenuous in the way of motivation than intelligent self-interest. Horace Kallen spoke for most liberals when he deplored the stupidity of the lordly men who are motivated by self-interest, but not of the enlightened variety, in whose minds the worker therefore ceases to figure as a consumer at all. He could still assume that a combination of governmental coercion and rational persuasion would either bring these unenlightened employers to their senses or lead to their replacement by a more intelligent class of employers. It was obvious to him, just as it had been obvious to Adam Smith, that almost everyone had to stake in increased productivity, higher wages, shorter hours of work, and a more creative use of leisure. Capitalism had raised the general standard of living, transformed scarcity into abundance, awakening wants where none had been before, multiplying few into many, bringing more and more varied goods to more people at lower prices. So what had been formerly, if at all, available to only a few, was now in the reach of many of those who had produced much and consumed little. It remained only to complete the capitalist revolution by making the blessings of leisure available to all. No improvement in mental capacity was required in order for the desirability of this goal to be generally recognized, nor did its realization require altruism and self-sacrifice, only a willingness to subordinate short-term pleasures to long-term peace and prosperity. But if humanity thrives on peace and prosperity, it also needs an occasional taste of battle. Men and women need to believe that life is a critical affair, in Richard Niebuhr's words. They cannot be satisfied merely with the opportunity to choose their goals and lifestyles, in the current jargon. They need to believe that their choices carry serious consequences. In the Christian cosmos, the forces of good and evil waged a mighty struggle for man's soul, and every action had to be weighed in the scales of eternity. Communism endowed everyday actions with the same kind of cosmic significance as Keynes and many others understood. In 1940, George Orwell made the same point about fascism. The Western democracies, he observed, had come to think that human beings desire nothing beyond ease, security, and avoidance of pain. Whatever else could be said about it, fascism was psychologically far sounder than any hedonistic conception of life. Hitler knew that men and women wanted more than comfort, safety, short working hours, hygiene, birth control. Whereas socialism and even capitalism have said to the people, "I offer you a good time," Hitler had said to them, "I offer you struggle, danger, and death." and as a result, a whole nation flings itself at his feet. In the same year, Lewis Mumford offered an analysis of the sleek progressive mind that could have easily been written by Orwell himself. Progressives, according to Mumford, believed that human nature is deflected from its natural goodness only by external conditions beyond the individual's control. Having no sense of sin, they discounted inherent obstacles to moral development, and therefore could not grasp the need for a form-giving discipline of the personality. They scorned the discipline gained through manual labor, the endurance of discomfort, and the nurture of the young. They sought to free mankind from all manner of hardship and adversity, from the boredom of domestic drudgery, and from natural processes in general. Societies based on progressive principles, Mumford wrote, renounced every larger goal in favor of the private enjoyment of life. They had created a race of men and women who deny because of their lack of experience that life has any other meanings or values or possibilities. Such people eat, marry, drink, bear children, and go to their grave in a state that is at best hilarious anesthesia, and at its worst, anxiety, fear, and envy, for the lack of the necessary means to achieve the fashionable minimum of sensation. Confronted with this kind of indictment, progressive usually reply that discipline and adversity are all very well for those who can take a certain level of material security for granted, but that impoverished masses can hardly be expected to listen to such appeals. Until everyone enjoys a decent standard of living, material improvement will therefore remain the overriding objective of democratic societies. The trouble with this argument is that political pressure for a more equitable distribution of wealth can only come from movements fired with religious purpose and a lofty conception of life. Without popular initiative, even the limited goal of a democratization of comfort cannot be realized. The favored few cannot be expected to consult the needs of the many, even if their own interests may be served, at least in the long run, by raising the general level of consumption. If the many now enjoy some of the comforts formerly restricted to the few, it is because they have won them through their own political efforts, not because the wealthy have freely surrendered their privileges, or because the market automatically assures abundance for all. Popular initiative, however, has been declining for some time, in part because the democratization of consumption is an insufficiently demanding ideal, which fails to call up the moral energy necessary to sustain popular movements in the face of adversity. The history of popular movements, including the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s, the last such uprising in American history, shows that only an arduous, even a tragic, understanding of life can justify the sacrifices imposed on those who seek to challenge the status quo. The idea of progress alone, we are told, can move men and women to sacrifice immediate pleasures to some larger purpose. On the contrary, progressive ideology weakens the spirit of sacrifice, nor does it give us an effective antidote to despair, even though it owes much of its residual appeal to the fear that its collapse would leave us utterly without hope. Hope does not demand a belief in progress. It demands a belief in justice, a conviction that the wicked will suffer, that wrongs will be made right, that the underlying order of things is not flouted with impunity. Hope implies a deep-seated trust in life that appears absurd to those who lack it. It rests on confidence, not so much in the future as in the past. It derives from early memories, no doubt distorted, overlaid with later memories, and thus not wholly reliable as a guide to any factual reconstruction of past events, in which the experience of order and contentment was so intense that subsequent disillusionments cannot dislodge it. Such experience leaves as its residue the unshakable conviction, not that the past was better than the present, but that trust is never completely misplaced, even though it is never completely justified either, and therefore destined inevitably to disappointments. If we distinguish hopefulness from the more conventional attitude known today as optimism, we think of it today as a character trait, a temperamental predisposition, rather than an estimate of the direction of historical change. We can see why it serves us better in steering troubled waters ahead than a belief in progress. Not that it prevents us from expecting the worst. The worst is always what the hopeful are prepared for. Their trust in life would not be worth much if it had not survived disappointments in the past, while the knowledge that the future holds further disappointments demonstrates the continuing need for hope. Believers in progress, on the other hand, though they like to think of themselves as the party of hope, actually have little need of hope, since they have history on their side. But their lack of it incapacitates them for intelligent action. Improvidence, a blind faith that things will somehow work out for the best, furnishes a poor substitute for the disposition to see things through, even when they don't.